Do I start? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Malcolm Harrison. I work for Petrochemicals, and I am going to talk for probably about 45 minutes on the economics of the oil and gas industry, part one. I'd have to be very clever. You quite possibly are. But I'd have to be much cleverer in order to cover everything in 45 minutes. This is step one of a 5-step journey. As we come towards the end of the presentation, I'll test your appetite for taking steps 2 and maybe 3. Look, before I talk about economics and prices and numbers and things, I figured it's probably a smart idea to introduce myself. Looking down the list of names of attendees, I realize I recognize a few, but not all. So I am a firm believer that the best teacher in life is failure. There's nothing better than making a mistake from which to learn. And my claim to fame would be, I have been making mistakes in the oil and gas industry for the last 40 years. I hope this next slide will give you some idea of just how well life has taught me. So here we go. Who do I think I am? Who do I think I am? This is me. This was a picture taken back in February of this year in Aberdeen in Scotland. As you can see, a bright-eyed, mid-30s, late 30s sort of guy making his way in life. And then, of course, around about March in this part of the world came to a close, and this is what I look like today. Here we go. I thought as I posted that picture, if I'd walked out on the streets looking like that a year ago, I probably would have been arrested as a potential bank robber. Today, I'm seen as a fine, upstanding citizen because I'm fully clad. Such as the world changed in 6 months. And had it not changed, I suspect I wouldn't be talking to you on webinar. Anyway, that's what I look like. This is where I started life, or started work at least, with these guys. You've probably heard of them, BP, a very long time ago now. One of the things BP recognized very quickly after joining them was my desperate need for education. They packed me off to university to do a chemical engineering degree. So I came out as a chemical engineer in the early 80s from the great University of Bradford. Many of you are going to be too young to remember 1987, but in 1987 the world stopped, much as it has in 2020, at that time because the stock markets of the world collapsed, the world GDP collapsed, and the oil price collapsed. Oil dropped about $10 a barrel. And BP very generously offered people a suitcase full of money in order to leave the company. And so I duly departed, armed with my suitcase, and I joined this company. BOC stands for the British Oxygen Company, who no longer exist. Made their money from cryogenically turning air into oxygen and nitrogen and various other rarer gases. BOC too recognized my desperate need for education. Very kindly dispatched me to university for 2 years to do an MBA, and I emerged 2 years later to join a team of people whose responsibility was to prepare the company for the future. We developed a new range of products, a new range of air separation plants, which were so good that we sold a dozen of them. But actually were so bad that they didn't work. Shortly after that, the BOC share price crashed. BOC was taken over by a German company, Linde. And BOC offered their employees, in return for leaving, a suitcase full of money. And so I departed BOC after 10 years, so we're probably up to about the year 2000 now. And I joined this organization. This organization is Foster Wheeler, also no longer exist today, were an EPC contractor, or were at one point a very successful EPC contractor. I worked for Foster Wheeler for 10 years, and I am proud to say that I was part of the senior leadership team that successfully drove Foster Wheeler into the ground and reduced the share price to the level where AMEC stepped in and took them over. I think you might be starting to see the pattern of failure that I talked about on the previous slide. So from Foster Wheeler, I joined a company called BG. BG no longer exists today. I was BG's chief process engineer. I clearly was getting better at my art because I managed to turn BG around in 5 years and collapsed the share price, and BG were taken over by Shell. The office facility in which I was working was closed, and BG offered people a suitcase full of money in order to leave the company. So now the proud owner of 3 suitcases, I had enough suitcases in order to retire. Found retirement to be very dull, and I took a call one day from an old colleague in Petrochemicals, John M. Campbell, and I joined as a teacher. Fully 6 years ago. Quite the best job I've ever had. I love doing it. I hope I can go on doing it forever. And so far, I haven't managed to drive Petrochemicals into the ground. But that, in a nutshell, is me. So what about? I said I'd talk a little bit about economics. So here goes. Here goes with a little bit about economics. Question number 1. Who knows who this is? And of course, your microphones are all muted, so you can't respond to the question. You can probably chat about it. But I'll give you the answer. This is a gentleman called Milton Friedman. Some of you may have got the answer. Milton Friedman was a very well-known, renowned even management consultant and management philosopher, even back in the 70s and the 80s. And responsible for many quotes. But this is the one that I wanted to use to set the scene for today. So sometime back in the 70s, Milton Friedman said, "The sole responsibility of every commercial organization is, within the law, to generate as high a return as possible for its owners." Many people have disagreed with that statement. Personally, I quite like it. For me, it means that every single one of us who are working for a commercial organization bear that responsibility to return as high a return as possible to our owners, sometimes to shareholders, to pension funds, to private equity companies, to individuals. The reason I put the quote up is that it does mean that those of us engaged in whatever part of the chain we're in the world of oil and gas have some responsibility to understand where the money is, where the profits are, and hence what it is that we have to do, what our part is in generating that high return. So that was my setting the scene. I wanted to hop to the next slide, which is a single picture, and it's a single picture that is trying and does not a bad job of summarizing an entire industry in one picture. So remember, the goal is to make as much money as we can. We make that money by extracting hydrocarbons from the ground. We remove the stuff that can't be sold, stuff like sulfur, stuff like occasionally carbon dioxide, stuff like water. And from the bits that remain, we process them to make as much money as we can from their components as is possible. Lots and lots of the money and the value is driven by what's underground, how it got there, and how best we are going to exploit it. I'm not going to talk about that. That is part 3. If we get to part 3 in this series of webinars. What I am going to talk about is the stuff above the ground. And essentially, we're known as the oil and gas industry, and predominantly what we produce is oil and gas. You'll see here we've got our little gas processing module with sales gas coming out of the top. It works its way to a market in one way or the other, maybe via a pipeline, maybe if the market is a long way away, by being liquefied and shipped and regasified. And largely, gas feeds three separate needs, three separate consumer blocks, customer blocks, industry sectors. One, the generation of power. The second, heating, be it of domestic properties or of commercial properties. And the third, as an industry feedstock. An industry feedstock where it's used to generate ammonia, hydrogen, methanol, petrochemicals, and a range of other products. And that's mostly where the gas goes. Off the bottom here, we've got, with the orange line here, we've got oil, which mostly goes to the transport sector. For trains, for boats, for planes, for cars, and for ships. I probably counted ships twice there. And some to going into feedstock, and minor quantities into heating and into power. There's very little crossover between the gas and the oil. One of the ways in which we cross over is this use of gas to liquids technology, which essentially takes a gas feedstock and produces a diesel or a gasoline, a transport fuel as a product. There are only 4 GTL plants in the world, and all there for rather specific geographic or political reasons. There may be 1 or 2 more. I did see that Uzbekistan has just announced financial plans for developing a GTL plant, but they're fairly small in terms of their influence over the overall market. But there we have the industry in one single picture. When I was putting this together a couple of days ago, I discovered some numbers that I found to be quite useful. If you look at energy consumption in each of these 4 sectors, approximately 40% of the energy consumption is in power. Now that includes coal as well as oil, although not nuclear, but hydrocarbons. So approximately 40% of the hydrocarbon usage is used for power, and approximately 20% for each of the other 3 blocks, for heating, for feedstock, and for transport. So they're sort of nice, easy numbers to remember. The other number that I liked, which was quite easy to remember, is that 80% of the carbon emissions from these 4 industries are generated by the top 20 countries. So there's lots of 20s and 80s in that. But look, we're the oil and gas industry. We produce gas, we produce oil. What's all this stuff in the middle? So as well, we have the facility to produce ethane, to produce propane, butanes. NGLs are essentially light oils, which go straight into a gasoline feedstock. And the question is, why do we do that? Why do we produce these extra byproducts? And I would suggest we do it for 2 reasons, for one of 2 reasons. One reason we do it is because we have to, i.e. we have to take light components out of an oil because we've got to be able to transport it and it needs to meet a vapor pressure specification. We have to take heavier components out of the gas because it has to meet a heating value and it has to meet a dew point specification. So one reason we take them out is because we have to. But the second reason is because we want to. And in some cases we want to because we can make more money from selling them as individual components than we can from, say, letting them slip into the oil or the gas stream. And the bit that I wanted to talk about was the part where we take them out because we want to, and how do we go about deciding how much we're going to take out in order to maximize the returns that our dear friend Milton Friedman talked about? There we go. That's the value chain, the oil and gas value chain, actually, rather than natural gas. So then we come to another famous philosopher. This particular philosopher had the name of Jessie J, and she came up with a philosophy diametrically opposed to that of Milton Friedman. I'm going to try something a little bit adventurous here and see if I can play music over WebEx. But this was how Jessie J expounded her particular philosophy on the purpose of a corporate organization. 3, 2, 1, let's see if it works. Hey, it works. I don't suppose Jessie J and Milton Friedman ever met, but I think they would have had an interesting exchange of views, because Jessie J thought it was nothing to do with the money. It was all to make the world dance. Jessie J was wrong. It's all about the money, money, money. So what I did last week was just go onto the internet and see where the money, money, money was last week for the various products that come out of this wonderful oil and gas industry. And you should see those on the screen in front of you. So as of the 7th of October, oil was selling for $42 a barrel. Gasoline, wholesale gasoline prices in the United States were about $1.40. You could buy ethane, this too in the United States, for 19 cents a gallon. You could buy propane for 43 cents a gallon. I thought I'll wander a little bit from the United States and we'll wander into the Middle East. If you wanted to buy a ton of butane last week in the Middle East, it would cost you about $500. Back to the US for a while, natural gas in the US was selling at $2.50. LNG, the spot market price for LNG last week was $3.80 for each for 1 million BTUs. I thought I'd throw coal into the mix as well. Not that it's a product of the oil and gas industry, but it's used for generating power. You could pick up coal for $57 a ton. And if you wanted to buy electricity, you can see the prices on the screen in front of you. About, what are we? About 30% more expensive in Europe than in the US. So there you go. But it isn't all about the money, money. It's about maximizing returns. Your only challenge is to look at that list of prices and say, so how are we going to operate the facility today in order to maximize returns? And have a crack at one or two questions. Should we be maximizing or minimizing NGL production? We have a choice, you see, with some of the C4s and C5s. We could slip them into NGL production, in which case we could sell them for the price of gasoline, or we could sell them as LPG. Which is the best deal? This is a question that you might be able to answer. Should we be selling gas domestically in the US at $2.50 a million BTUs? Or should we be liquefying it, putting it in a ship, sending it to Asia, regasifying it and selling it as LNG and making a markup of about 50%? What about ethane? There are options for ethane. We could let ethane slip into the sales gas, in which case we would sell it at $2.50. We could produce it as a separate product, feed the petrochemical industry, in which case we'd sell it at 19 cents a gallon. Or we could let some of it slip into the propane, in which case we would sell it for 43 cents a gallon. How much money is to be made from refining? We buy oil at $42 a barrel. We turn it into gasoline at $1.40 a gallon, and so on and so on. What's the best way to generate power? There are choices. Is it gas or is it coal? And lots of other questions. The point of putting these up is it's very hard to answer every single one of them based on the prices that you see before you, because of the mixture of units. But if instead of looking at tons and barrels and US gallons, if you look at those same prices, and there they are again, in terms of their the cost per unit of energy, then all of a sudden you can compare them. And of course, when you look at those various destinations of the products, actually mostly what customers are interested in is buying sources of energy, whether they're measured in gallons or tons or whatever is neither here nor there. So it's once you know heating values and densities and various other physical properties, you can convert them. Now you can start to answer some of those questions that I asked before. And actually, one of the things you notice is we can, and I'll use BTUs rather than the megawatts, the European units, but gas was selling at $2.50 a million BTUs. Oil, or gasoline rather, which is what NGLs are, was selling at nearly 5 times as much. So we should be, that first question, should we be trying to maximize NGL production? Yes, we should. The profits we're making, and they're made from the liquid products and not from the gaseous products. And the values are quite significant. Take a look at ethane. So these are ethane prices in the US today. It's cheaper to buy ethane than it is to buy natural gas. So what does that tell us about how we should be operating today? I'll tell you what I think it tells us. It tells us if we can slip that ethane into the propane, and typically you could tolerate 3 or 4% of ethane in the propane, you can sell it for both more than sales gas at about nearly 4 times the price you could get as ethane. So you should be slipping as much as you can into the propane. You should be slipping as much as you can into the natural gas. And the third thing you should be doing, if there's any left after that, if you have to take out more in order to meet your product specs, you should be burning it as fuel. Because it's cheaper to use ethane as fuel than it is to use natural gas and lose the sales value. You get the feeling? So, but there was that question about, should you be selling your natural gas locally, or should you be liquefying it and sending it off to Asia? And actually what you see here is the margins on LNG at the moment are low, are probably amongst the lowest they've been for quite some time. Driven by a pandemic and crashes in economy all over the place, and also driven by a surge in supply as a number of plants have come on stream. So actually, at the moment, there isn't much to be gained profit-wise in the world of LNG. But if you look back only a year, the LNG spot market price was 2.5 times what it is today. If you look back 4 or 5 years, LNG was selling at $18 a million BTUs. When you understand that, you get some idea, if you're ever involved in the LNG market, why there's such a desperate rush once an LNG project has been sanctioned to get it to the market and deliver it, because the aim is what does the early bird do? Does the early bird catch the worm? I think is the phrase. If you can get to market before the other guys, you can get the premium prices. Just one more thing on that. What about coal? Coal's an interesting. Should you be generating power with coal or with natural gas? In the US, it's interesting. Natural gas wins. And although there was a push early in the Trump presidency to reinvigorate the coal industry, the market would say actually you're cheaper to run with gas. If you hop to Europe, we're actually, and I haven't put it on the slide, gas prices in Europe are about double what they are in the US. It's actually cheaper to generate electricity with coal than it is with gas, which is why, in the end, the push towards gas for power in Europe is driven by legislation and regulation rather than the market. I just wanted to mention two more things. The knowledge of prices does lead you to understand some of the more wacky things that you see in our industry, some of the hard to understand. There are 4 refineries in Nigeria, all of which are shut down. And they're all shut down because the market for gasoline is government controlled, and the price for which the government are prepared to pay for gasoline is less than the price of oil. The other unusual thing you see is that in some instances companies are fined for flaring or are not permitted to flare for other than emergency reasons. And so in some cases there's an incentive to operate as inefficiently as you possibly can in order to avoid flaring. So the market and the prices do encourage some dysfunctional behavior in some cases. But look, that was all about day-to-day. That's the day-to-day stuff. So if you were deciding how to operate your facility today, those numbers would give you some guidance as to which products are going to give you the best profits. What about if you're not designing, if you're not operating, but you're designing? And that is my next slide. I hope you're still all with me. It's quite strange talking into a camera and not being able to see the audience. But I'm not going to tell you about these because you're all smart and you remember them from school. But the net present value of a bunch of future cash flows is equal to the sum of the cash flows divided by the cost of capital over time. And if your revenue stream is a constant, you've got an equation there. I would be incapable of deriving these out, but trust me, they're true. They must be true. I found them on the internet. So now if you look at I'll say market prices. I'll say market prices at the 7th of October, and now we're going to convert them using the NPV formula to what is a capital equivalent. A capital equivalent. So what I've done here is I have assumed a cost of capital of 2%. The cost of capital is unusually low at the moment. And that's we're investing for a 10-year period. And what that tells me is that if I basically plug these numbers into this equation and discount it at 2% over 10 years, anything I can do in the design phase to increase production by an extra barrel a day has a capital equivalent of $138,000. So I can afford to invest capital up to about $140,000 for each barrel that I produce. And you'll see all of the other numbers have been derived in the same way, and in the same way that previously I converted to energy equivalents. You have energy equivalent numbers there. Now this is crude. This is crude and simple. This doesn't take account of things like corporation tax and phasing of capital investment and so on and so on. But crudely, if you're sitting there, if you are a designer, if you're an engineer and you're in the technical world, this gives you some idea of the commercial benefit of the decisions that you're being asked to take when you put a design together. So now, what I wanted to do was to end with some tough questions. I wanted to talk a little bit about the whole renewable market. You all will have seen, I'm sure, that the statements being made by governments and companies around the world at the moment. Shell and BP have both declared recently that by 2050 that their operations will be carbon neutral. The European Union has declared it will be carbon neutral by 2050. China even declared that it will be carbon neutral by 2060. Are these things going to happen? Hey, I don't know. But it does mean there'll be changes in our world because they're being driven by major companies and major governments. And I guess the questions I wanted to have a go at was just how far away is solar power from displacing gas or coal? What about wind? Just what is going on in the transport market? You've got companies like, or a company like Tesla, that's got a market capitalization that is greater than ExxonMobil. Actually, Tesla produced 350,000 cars a year. Toyota produced 10 million cars a year, 30 times as many cars. Tesla as a company is worth more. There's a whole bunch going on. There's other questions as well about how you value, once you've got these numbers, how you value companies. Saudi Aramco has enough oil in the ground to produce at current rates for another 100 years. But as the world is weaning itself off oil, how do you value those assets? How do you value Saudi Aramco? There's a couple of numbers on this screen that I'd ask you to just bear with me a minute. Slight hiccup. A couple of numbers on this screen that I'd ask you to remember. The first is electricity in Europe. The capital equivalent of a kilowatt of energy in Europe is about $3,000. If I spend $3,000 to generate a kilowatt over a 10-year period at a 2% cost of power, then I'm just about breaking even. The capital equivalent of a gallon of gasoline is about $2,500 per kilowatt. Just remember those two numbers: $3,000 for power, $2,500 for gasoline. And then let's look at. And then along came renewable energy. This is taken from a report from the International Renewable Energy Association. It was published in 2019, so it's a little bit out of date, but not too much. And it shows the falling cost of solar generated power over a period of about 10 years. And solar panels are capable of delivering power at a cost of about $1,000 per kilowatt. Remember our base number was 3,000, so solar power is somethingly attractive, isn't it? Onshore wind can generate power at about half the capital equivalent of current wholesale prices within Europe. So onshore wind is somethingly attractive, isn't it? Offshore wind, through to 2019, is arguably just about competitive. Now, of course, if you didn't all have your microphones muted, you would be screaming at me now, wouldn't you? You'd say, you're an idiot. You've forgotten something. Would you? And I have. And there are very good reasons why the last three statements I made are not true. There are very good reasons why solar, onshore wind and offshore wind are quite a long way from being competitive with hydrocarbons at the moment. If you want to come back for part 2 of the lecture, Part 2 of this series, we'll talk about why that is. The other one that I wanted to leave you with was batteries. Do you remember the number that we took away for gasoline? The capital equivalent of a gallon of gasoline was about $2,500 for every kilowatt. I can buy a battery pack for about 10% of that. So clearly batteries are also thumpingly competitive, aren't they? And of course the answer is no, they're not. And the secret as to why they're not is contained in part 2 of the series. Of course, if you've already worked out the answer, you don't need to come along to part 2. That is all I wanted to say today, ladies and gentlemen. I am getting regular requests on my screen for annotation. I'm quite sure what that means. So what do I want? So what do you take away from today? It's only really, I'm only trying to leave maybe 4 or 5 messages. The first is, when we think about prices, think energy and not tons or gallons or million standard cubic feet. Think energy. Remember, it's all about money, money, money. Remember Jessie J. Do not follow the philosophy of Jessie J. She wasn't as smart as Milton Friedman. But it is all about the money, 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 money. But it's about money of today when you're operating, market prices of today when you're operating, and it's about money of tomorrow, capital equivalent and NPVs when you're designing. So what we've done today is we've taken step one on a journey of 5 steps. 5 steps which are all about understanding how to find the money, money, money. Ladies and gentlemen, I will leave you there, and I just make a couple of requests, if I could, in closing. If you like what you heard and you're all still on the line, can you do me a favor and tell a friend? Tell a friend. If you didn't like it, then keep it to yourself. If you want to know more, if you are interested in step 2 and step 3 and 4 and 5, then drop me a note or drop Clay a note. That's my details on the screen in front of you. Petroskill's email address. You'll find them easy to find on LinkedIn. I'm not gonna, Clay maybe at the end of this will ask for feedback forms or whatever. It's not something that I'm going to ask for, but I do appreciate positive comments, insults, abuse. Anything is helpful if at the end of this you have any thoughts that you'd like to share. So that's all I wanted to say for now, and I think that means that I hand back to Clay. And Clay is going to ask me lots of embarrassing questions that I'm not able to answer. Back to you, Clay.
Yeah, thank you, Malcolm. Yes, I do have some questions here, and we should have some time for a few more, so continue to put those in the chat if you have them. And real quick, before I get to those questions, as Malcolm said, this is part 1, and so in addition to sending out the recording of this section, I will certainly send invitations to the next one that we schedule. So to jump to our first question here, this was from the natural gas value chain slide where you went over there. The question asks, what are some examples of feedstock?
Some examples of feedstock. That's a nice open question. Can I put the slide back up?
Sure. Yeah. You're still presenter there.
I am. Let me just give me a second. Where am I going here? That's too far. This is. I did say that this is really the heart of the making money. This is why reservoir engineers and petroleum engineers are paid far more than facilities engineers as I was, because the examples, the feedstock varies enormously from crudely represented on here, fields which are pretty much entirely gas, shale gas. I think coal bed methane we've got here, which is essentially no liquid products, through to, on the other hand, really heavy oil fields. Now, the way in which you exploit those varies enormously, and their value varies enormously. I don't know if I'm in any way answering the question. The important takeaway that I leave, though, in terms of feedstock, is just remember the money is in the oil and is in the gasoline and liquid products, and not so much the gas. So typically, the heavier the field is in oil and condensate, the more long-term value it's got. And of course, with the disadvantages, I don't know if I addressed the question. If the person who asked it has got some means of telling me, then I'd be grateful.
All right. Next question is, what are the parameters, the economical parameters that need to be considered while deciding grassroots refinery configuration?
Oh, wow. I need to know the name of the person who asked that. Can you repeat the question one more time, please?
It says, what are the economical parameters that need to be considered while deciding grassroots refinery configuration?
The economic parameters, grassroots refinery configuration. Wow, that's tough. Wow, that's tough. Well, top of the head stuff. I wonder who's thinking about a grassroots refinery configuration at the moment. With what's going on in the industry, it's hard to see there's going to be a need for much refining capacity. But scream at me and tell me I'm wrong. I guess then it would come, if there is, then it's going to be driven by some strategic or political or domestic purpose. But the economic parameters, they'll be driven by feedstock. The previous question, the different oils, different compositions, different values, but those are mostly reflected in the prices in which you buy them. And then secondly, it will be driven by, to an extent, local market. And some of the prices that we talked about just now, I mentioned Nigeria, where nobody's going to build a grassroots refinery in Nigeria because the market is controlled and gasoline is given away. But I guess that the economic parameters are going to be essentially what you perceive as being the long-term value of the different components. Starting with LPGs and gasoline, the values of which we've talked about, but then going through naphthas, which will need a local market probably to use it as a petrochemical feedstock, the heavier fuel oils that are used for transport and so on. I'm just rambling at the moment. The best thing I could probably do is to stop because the question's a little bit too hard for me.
Fair enough. Okay. Next question.
Ask me an easy one, will you?
So this one says, we see hydrogen discussions a lot and have not touched about it in this session. Can you explain about hydrogen position in the fuel chain?
Yeah, I'm wondering if I'm going to live long enough to see the hydrogen economy. Obviously, that's the picture for the future, and the future not being that far away. Carbon neutral by 2050, 2060, or whatever, is that hydrogen will replace natural gas in many of the current uses. It has the potential to be a transport fuel. There's enormous pipeline infrastructure in large parts of the world, so it can be easily transported. The issue, and maybe it will get there. The issue, of course, at the moment with at the moment is, although the technologies are there in order to more expensive than hydrocarbons on its own. And of course, the main source at the moment of hydrogen is by cracking a hydrocarbon feed source. So you're not actually taking CO2 out of the production train unless you can sequester it and stick it back in the ground. If I was able to predict the future, then I would be much richer than I actually am. But the technology is there. You can see that there's the possibility of green hydrogen, which would be hydrogen generated through renewable sources, vegetation or whatever. But something significant has to happen on the technology side before it's viable, or what actually seems to be now almost inevitable, something significant has to happen on the regulation side, such as significant carbon emission pricing or something like that before it has a place. I don't think the challenges are predominantly technical. There are technical opportunities, but in the end, it's going to have to be pushed through with legislation, I'm guessing. In a way, I'm flattered that people would ask me questions that are this complicated. These would be more suited to somebody on the United Nations Council, or maybe the International Energy Agency.
Okay. Next, we've got a comment and then a question that are somewhat related. So the comment was that subsidized market prices are not necessarily a fair comparison. And then a related question from someone else asking, does the solar cost per kilowatt hour include tax breaks?
Yeah, yeah. I think I can answer that one. And the answer is no. The answer is no. The numbers as they were presented are capital costs against the power that a solar panel will produce. I missed two bits that if you come back again, I'll tell you about. So it's not nearly so attractive as it appears in the way that I presented it. I have to agree with the first thing. It isn't a fair comparison to compare subsidized market prices with markets that are not subsidized. But of course, that's precisely what is going to happen if people are really serious about reducing carbon emissions, because it's only going to happen by markets being subsidized, or those that are not currently subsidized, ours, the oil and gas market, being penalized through carbon taxes and just regulation that prohibits certain activities. So it's right to say at a strictly technical engineering level, it's not a fair comparison. But a big player in the energy market in the future will be governments and legislation, and they will drive behaviours. Could I just so I can avoid asking any more questions? Could I ask one question back to the audience? I see there's still about 120 people who are on the line. If you look on the top of the WebEx menu bar at the top, I think if you click on the participants box, that somewhere in there you'll see the facility to vote. There's on my screen here, there's a little green arrow and there's a little red arrow. And I'd just be interested, I wanted to ask two questions. The first is, and I say please feel free to be harsh. Of those who are still on the line, how many people got any benefit from the last hour of their lives? If you got a benefit, could you click the green tick? And if you didn't, could you click the red cross? And we'll see if this works.
All right, lots of green checks here. That's good.
Yes, and lots of people slowly finding out where the green and the red buttons are. That's good. I realised actually in asking that question, I took a serious risk of ruining my evening. So thank you. That's resoundingly positive. And how many people would be interested in part 2 of the series, which is talking a little bit more about? Oh, Clay, I might need your guidance on how to clear these results and go on to the next question. You know how to do that?
Yeah, if you clicked either yes or no, if you just click it again, then it will remove it.
Right, that's great. So I'll wait for it all to go back to 0. I got that. That was resoundingly positive. So thank you very much for that. It means that I didn't waste my time, and I can open the champagne when we finish. And just if you can unclick your buttons, and I'll ask question number 2 slowly. Question number 2 is, how many of you would be interested in coming along to part 2 of the series and talking a little more about the ins and outs of, well, the bits that I didn't talk about. The bits I didn't talk about, I'm trying not to use the words, that bit that was the impact of availability and the impact of efficiency. And now I've given away the secret, but the big downside to both wind and solar, obviously, is that they don't work when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. A solar panel actually produces at capacity less than 20% of the time. But so back to ticks again. But would you be so kind as to tick if you'd be interested in steps 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the series? Could you click your buttons? And we're getting far better at voting. And if you do come back again, I promise I'll get far better at presenting. So Clay, that successfully avoided me answering any questions for a few minutes, but we've got about 5 minutes. Is anything more I can help with?
Yeah, I've got a couple more here. This one asks, in short, if that's possible, I'll add parenthetically, how can we economize GTL processes refinery with the current supply chain of oil and gas?
How can we economize GTL processes? This is a personal view. I don't think I would try. And I realize in saying that there'll be people who are engaged in doing this very task and will rush to disagree, and I'm quite possibly wrong. GTL doesn't cut it as a technology. The capital cost is high. The efficiency is low. There are 4 GTL plants in the world at the moment. One in Qatar, which is there more for strategic and portfolio reasons than anything else. A number in South Africa. I think we know why they are there. One in Nigeria. Very few of the decisions that are made in Nigeria are made for strictly commercial reasons. And then one in Malaysia, which was a trial. I don't think other than niche applications, I don't think GTL is ever going to be mainstream. And people used to say that about LNG, and clearly it is now. But many people online will know this already, but I think Uzbekistan is famous in the world for being this could come up in a quiz as being the only country in the world that is doubly landlocked, i.e. it has 2 countries on every border between it and the ocean. It also has very large reserves of gas, but no way of getting it to the market. So you might have niche applications like that, where what they're doing in Uzbekistan is saying, well, we can't use this gas. They're going to close the shop in 2050, so we're going to put a GTL plant in. We're going to generate gasoline and we'll use it in the local market. And maybe there'll be a few other niche applications like that, but the fundamentals with GTL are just are never going to take it to be mainstream. It's a shame we can't hold a discussion because I bet there are lots of people out there who disagree with me, but that's my personal view.
All right, and then the next question asks, what is blue ammonia recently shipped to Japan from Aramco, and how does it fare as fuel for power generation?
Oh, I don't know. You know, can I take that one on board? And if the person who asked it and anybody else who's interested wants to drop me an email, that needs a bit of contemplation. It's something I'd like to do because I would very much like to know the answer, but at the moment I don't. But I'm happy to take it as an action if you'd like me to dig into it and get back to you.
Yep, fair enough. And then that's it for the questions. There were a handful of questions asking your thoughts on renewables and various bits of technology there. So I will use that as a bit of a tease and an advertisement for the next section. We will collect those comments and get those to you so we can make sure that you're covering that stuff in the subsequent renewables conversations. So thank you everybody for the questions, for the discussion. Malcolm, thank you very much for an excellent presentation.
You're more than welcome.
All right, and again, thanks all for joining. We will get the recording and notes out to everyone within the next couple days. Check back on our website for future Tech Tuesday webinars, and we hope to see everybody again. Thanks all, and stay safe.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. Stay safe, as Faye says.
All right. Bye, all.
So, yeah, I'm guessing you're still listening. I'm going to sign off, but I'll give you a quick call in a few minutes.